All right, we're officially live. How you feeling over there, Elena?
Well, a little nervous.
So, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Redemption Stories. I'm your co-host, Marlon Johnson, with my amazing co-host, Elena Tang. And if it's your first time joining us, if it's the first time watching us do this, we're gonna tell you that this show is essentially about understanding how an individual's pain is actually. Ooh, what's up, April?
Hi.
Understanding how an individual's pain is actually the thing that causes the creation of their superpower. So, April, what's going on? I was just introducing the audience to a little bit about what the show is, just in case it's their first time coming in here, and just so people know, I want them to understand this is not the final product in the sense of when I say that, Elena and I, we sat, we spoke, and we had a conversation about what this show could possibly be for people, how it can help them. And instead of procrastinating and putting it off till it was perfect, we decided, look, let's get started right now. You guys are seeing the messy middle. The people that were on here for the first 3 episodes, it was happening in the Zoom room. Right now, we've created the StreamYard, except I've been booted out the StreamYard. Elena has no idea how to work the StreamYard, but we still can, right? Because
Figure it out.
we figure it out. So we want to make sure that we're providing as much value to you. I'm going to let Elena introduce herself, and then I want to introduce our guest. So, Elena,
Yes.
introduce yourself to the crowd or to the audience.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Elena Tang, aka Elena Method on Instagram. But yeah, Marlon and I decided to do this podcast to really just like bless people, to try to help people. We get a lot of comments where or we get a lot of people that reach out to us saying, hey, can you help me with mindset? Hey, can you help me? I don't know what my superpowers are. I'm struggling in this and that in my entrepreneurship and real estate business. And so we connect with people every day as coaches and just as leaders in our real estate community, sub 2. And so we thought that we would launch this kind of podcast, if you will, to hear people's stories like April, which I can't wait to actually dive in. And then also to help others that are wanting to understand their superpowers and to be able to draw from their pain. Because that's where we believe people have a lot of their superpowers, is from their pain. So thank you, April, so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. I asked you to be on here. I wanted to come on and hang out with you guys today, so I'm
This
excited.
is perfect.
I'm loving this. So, for people that don't know, I was actually I was fortunate enough to have April on my podcast last year, Into the Mind, where I got to learn deeply about her story. Really how it was such the epitome of, from the trials and tribulation to the triumph, where essentially you were at that point in time, like you had just come from a place where you were just about getting ready to be homeless. Like you were down to nothing. You were really relying on the support of your community to keep things afloat, to keep your family, keep everybody's heads above water. And you ultimately had to start digging deep to eventually pull yourself out of that hole. So, today we're going to be revisiting some of that pain, if you're cool with it.
Yeah.
Because, again, people find themselves there today and they haven't yet made it through the other side. So, I want us to be able to revisit that place and speak to them where they're at currently.
Oh, yes. Love it.
So, April, can you take me back to, and maybe, by the way, maybe that pain, by the way, also might not have been the first pain, right? Because even in that pain, you already had a deep level of strength, right? But can you take me back to, who April was before the April we see now? Because you're a rock star, by the way. Like when I go on Instagram, I'm just like watching you crush it. And I'm just like, oh, you are such an awesome leader. You're an awesome provider to your community. So people see this, new and evolved individual and they're just like, wow, she must always have everything figured out. But that wasn't quite the case. So can you take me back to a time where it wasn't all figured out?
Yes. Back when, so, it's funny because it's like I've done so many things in my life. Coming out of college, I worked for a finance company and I did really well there, but I just couldn't stand it. And I actually wholesaled financial products, so like life insurance. So I knew there's like this whole wholesale world, in anything that you get into, but it just never dawned on me about real estate. So I didn't like it. So I left there and I went and I started a restaurant. And I
Mm.
love the restaurant business, but it's a lot of hard work. And we built it up, and it's actually still there. I sold it. I built it up with my mom and my sisters, and I sold it back to them, and they're still running it. It's been going for 10 years. And so, but it was just a lot of hard work. And then I had my son, and that's when I met I had met my husband, and then I had my son. But my husband was in real estate, and we thought that we were going to be these commercial real estate developers, and we made some big massive mistakes, and we lost everything on this one deal that was a guaranteed. I'm not kidding. I don't know whatever your faith you are, but part of me thinks like the Lord allowed this because we learned so much from our mistakes. And, we got to this point where we were like, wow, like we look back and we thought everything that we did, like we were just banking on this one thing, and so we got to the lowest of the low. And at the lowest of the low, I was like, I don't care, what happens. Like, we're going to find something and we're going to do this. And that is when wholesaling real estate just like dropped in our laps. And I just was like, okay, I am going to buy a business mentorship and I'm going to learn how to do this and I am going to get after it because I know that whatever I do, all I have to do is work hard and I can make it work. And so I literally so I had my third baby. Her name's Grace, and she was 2 months old. And I had a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. So I had a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 2-month-old. And then COVID hit. And I was like, all right, we're doing this. And we just went after it. So I had like everything against me at the time, but I was so desperate. And I knew that I had to make this work. And so, it was like from that like place of brokenness that I was able to say, no, like I'm going to turn my life around and I'm going to do this. And even now, like when I have my moments of fear that I'm going to lose everything, because I do, I have my moments of fear where I'm like, what if this happens again, where we make one mistake and we lose everything? And I just go back to that time where I'm like, I did lose everything. My worst fear happened to me. And guess what I did? I picked up my stuff and I kept going, and look where I am now. So it's like when your worst fear happens to you, it's almost a gift because it allows you to build strength. Like, oh, this did happen to me. And if it ever did happen to me again, because it could, I don't think it will. I make a lot better decisions now, I think. But I know that I could do this again.
Can I ask a question, April? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, keep going.
So what's incredible about just everything that you just shared is this idea of, and the fall is like, when some people kind of like scrape their knee, it's like, oh, it's a little owie. And it's like, I think that to some people, right, pain is relative. That's what I'm learning more and more, right? And what I love about your story is that to me, like, if I were to have experienced that, I don't know if my immediate thought, and not, maybe I'm sure that yours maybe wasn't like this immediate, but it was, what I loved hearing is that you're like, when you got back up, you're like, I am going to make this work. And so what in that moment, or where did you draw that confidence from? Like, can you kind of recall back of like, I went through adversity, or I went through adversity, And I knew that I had that in me that I could transfer over to this, because what you said earlier, you said, I know I can do this. And as long as I work hard,
Yes.
I can do this.
So, when I just kind of knew that already from, you know, growing my business in the finance industry and also growing my restaurant business, just because I knew that if you just keep doing what you're supposed to be doing, then you will succeed. And I will say I do. You asked me like maybe one turning point, and I might have said this to Marlon before, that I remember I was talking to someone from my church, and they basically gave me permission, and it was just like a switch in my head. They were like, April, I think you need to do this, because I was telling them this is what I want to do. What do you think? And they said, I think you need to do this. And as soon as they did that, I don't know, it was just something in my head was like, okay, they just gave me that permission, that it's almost like I needed it. So you really do need your community. You need your people. And that was even one of the reasons why the first thing I did was join a mentorship. It wasn't Pace's. I joined this one, and then I joined Pace Morby's mentorship 4 months later, because I just know the power of community. Like when you're down, and it just takes one word to change someone's life. And I'll never forget that phone call, and it just clicked, and there was no stopping me after that.
You know what, April, I have a question too, right? Because you said something really interesting earlier. You said that you were in a place where you had your 3 young ones at that moment in time. And ultimately, wow, that was distracting. I didn't even see. I wasn't
Sorry.
comment. But no, I love it. I
got the power.
So, yeah. So you said at some point you had your 3 young ones and you were afraid of losing everything. And then you actually lost everything, right? Which turned out to be a blessing in disguise. And I'm curious, because there are some people that do have that fear of losing it all, right? Where did that come from? Like, where did that stem from? Was that always something that you carried with you, beforehand?
Oh, you want to talk about my trauma in my childhood? I am a firm believer in deep diving into your story and going back, and I like to call it ministering to your younger self, because I do think that, as a child in the home that I grew up in, that I always walked on eggshells, and I was always afraid. And I never knew how afraid I was until about 2 years ago. I was in counseling, because I'm a big proponent of counseling too. And my counselor said to me, I think you're afraid. And I was like, do you even know me? Like, I've been coming here, and like, I am not afraid of anything. But I realized that was like my tough girl act, that I was a learned behavior, from things that had happened to me when I was younger. And I started realizing that actually I'm afraid of everything. And, as I started being more aware of what my fears were, I was able to, I don't want to say overcome them, because, they'll wash over you from time to time. And I think it's all based on your origin story, because like your fears are going to be different than mine. And it's based off our origin story, right? But like, as I'm more aware of what my fears are, I can overcome them. And, I heard somebody this morning talking, it was a health counselor, and I just happened to listen to her video, and she said, she's just honest with all of her clients, like, the problem is you, and if that's the good news, because if the promise is you, then you're also the solution. And so, for me, I always look at where my ownership is from this, right? My ownership in what is happening to me, because I am in complete control. Well, not complete control, but I am in a lot of control of what happens to me, and I can also be the solution, right? So, as I was more aware of my fears, I was more aware of, yeah, I'm not going to believe this about myself today. And maybe the fears come back again tomorrow. But then, like, after a couple months, maybe it only hits me once a week, or maybe it only hits me once a month. And I'm aware of it now. So I think that is so important, is to be aware of what your fears are and know that like you are the solution to help overcome them.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And I have to agree because, doing that sort of work, it's deep work that I know I've done. I know I've spoken with Elena. I know she's done, where I look back at my past, right? And I can look, it's like, you know what? Yeah, when I grew up, I always had this worry, this fear of money, right? Because in my household, we didn't talk about money. It was almost like this secret that was kept. And I would simply, whenever I asked for things, I was told like, hey, we can't afford it. So it's like in my mind, I started to build this reality and this story of, hey, we can't afford things. We must not have things. Like we must not have enough money to go get things. So even if we do get money, don't go and buy things because it's going to put a burden on the family. And essentially, I never would want to spend money because I never wanted to put a burden on the family. I didn't want to put a burden on the people I cared about. And so that just became the story that I grew up with. And although it led to a lot of things that didn't necessarily work in my favor, right? Built a lot of bad habits. It also allowed me this ability to really be very analytical about kind of wants and needs and being very aware of other people and how they may feel in a transaction, in a situation. So it was from that deep kind of like that deep pain, because it was a pain back then, right? Of like, hey, wanting but not being able to fulfill that desire, came this ability to now be aware, to be more aware, to be hypersensitive to situations. So it's cool to hear that for yourself, that a part of your ability to overcome your challenges and obstacles is actually diving backwards and utilizing your past as a lesson book, if you will.
Yes.
That's really critical.
I like to do a lot of story work because I like to know why I operate, or how I operate and why I do what I do. So when things come up, it's like, oh, okay, I'm feeling this way because of this past story, and you don't always know what that is unless you are well aware of where you came from and what your story is. And it's hard because you don't want to blame anyone in your life, and that's not what you're doing, but you're also not letting anybody off the hook because we're all imperfect.
Right.
And I know that I'm probably hurting my kids sometimes in my imperfections, and so it's just the freedom to know that we're all imperfect, and where we came from is so important to who we are today, and why we do what we do. And if we're ready to, overcome, like what you said, Marlon, like overcome our financial stuff, break generational curses, and change things forever for your family, is by knowing your story.
Big time.
So April, I have a question. Like you talked about origin stories, right? And I think that's always really powerful. Is like there's a I kind of call it like a moment of tension, right? It's like you can go one way or the other, and it's like some people, they choose to go a certain direction, and they're like, I just want to avoid it, right? Depending on their past traumas and whatnot, and that's how they kind of developed coping skills. Or some people are like, no, I'm going to dig, and I'm going to go even further. Because I think that you've mentioned multiple times awareness, and I'm really curious for you and your story. Like, have you always kind of just had a level of curiosity of wanting to be aware, or what made you, before you signed up for therapy, to kind of be a lot more intentional about being aware of your stuff? Like, can you kind of like talk about that process? And the reason why I'm asking is because I meet a lot of people that have experienced trauma, but they've never thought about going to therapy before for various different reasons. And so I'd love to kind of borrow from your story to say, oh gosh, like that's interesting, April's process, because I kind of have been there, or I've explored that myself. And maybe, now that April is an incredibly successful entrepreneur, like maybe that's the route that I'm going to go because April did it. And so I want to also. Like, does that make sense in terms of like, yeah.
That's a good question because I think it's a process. When you talk about like fight or flight. So
Yeah.
when you get into a situation where you feel dysregulated, everybody, you're either going to fight or you're going to flight. I'm the oldest. We had some addiction in our household. But I was always the fighter, right? So I would never go with the mainstream. I always wanted to like push the limits. You tell me what to do, I was going to do something opposite. I was always that way. And I always just kind of wanted to figure it out on my own, which is so funny because I just completely see that in my daughter. And I'm just like, oh, wow, this was me as a little kid. But it's precious, and it just wasn't really developed in me as a kid just because, you're kind of pushed to the side, right? And when you come from a family with addictions. And so but I always fought my way forward. And I think that the bad thing about that is that I had this attitude of like, I'm not scared of anything. You better not mess with me, and I'm not saying that has disappeared because, it comes out, if you like, you trigger and I get triggered, it will come out, I'm still a fighter when I get into a situation where I get triggered. But the cool thing is that, well, oh, come back there later. So really, it kind of all came to a head is back when everything kind of fell apart. And, we really didn't have the money for counseling, but I'm like, something is going on, here where I'm not making the right decisions and I need to figure out, why. And, am I just following my feelings or what's going on? And so it was probably, maybe like 6 months after I started my business that Mark and we go to a marriage counselor, and I started going to a separate counselor that digs into stories. And really, it's just so helpful because you get tools. They teach you tools on how to ask questions. And a lot of times what we'll do, all of us humans, is shame makes you ask the question, why? Like, why did you do this? And this is even good for like when with your children, right? If you say to your child, like, why did you do that? That's a very shameful question. It's kind of like they don't know why they did it. They did it out of some need that they have, right?
Yeah.
So and you want to be kind to yourself too and not ask the question why. Like, just be more curious, because why can be a shame question for yourself. And so I think it was even that when my counselor said, I think you're afraid, that was kind of like started a whole like eyes opening to what's around me. Like, I didn't even ever know what anxiety was. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling anxiety. And, that's okay. Like, it means you're alive. Because if you're hiding under shame, because you don't want to look at the things around you, then you're not going to feel all the feelings that make us human and make us alive. And so I don't know. I just kind of always been a proponent of counseling, and I think it's helpful. And I think that you can, like, even with my marriage, like I have a great marriage with my husband. I could have a good marriage and not go to counseling, or I can have an amazing, I can go to counseling and we can have all these tools and we can get to know each other even better and have an amazing marriage. Like, I don't want to have just a good marriage. I want to have an amazing marriage. Like, doesn't that sound awesome to have an amazing marriage? And so those are some of the reasons why I believe that counseling is the best. And I'm a big proponent of it. And I'm not afraid to say that I go.
That's so beautiful.
And April, what I wanted to say, like, it's interesting, right? Because your personality, you have like a nice fiery personality. Like, I love it, right? And you even said like you were the fighter, right? Growing up, like, there's people that freeze, there are people that run, and there are people that fight, and you found yourself to be a fighter. I'm curious, as you were growing up, were you able, like, when you expressed yourself, within your community, within your family, and like you expressed like who you were, how was that received as you were growing up? Was it acknowledged? Was it kind of pushed to the side? I'm very curious from that.
Yeah. So it's funny because my husband said something to me the other day that, a lot of times when you're a kid, adults will talk at you and not to you. And so I think there was a lot of that. But when you grow up in a household where there's marital strife and addiction, um, those emotions are so big that there's really no space for any other emotions. And so I just don't feel like my emotions were developed. I heard a podcast once, and they were talking about women and men, and how not all the time, but sometimes, women's primary emotion can be anger. And I resonated with that because I have a friend whose primary emotion is sadness. So like when something happens, she immediately gets sad and doesn't react, whereas I immediately get angry, and I have to learn how to like be okay that I'm angry and not react out of that anger, right? Because that's my primary emotion. Well, I never learned that as a child. And your emotional health and is very important, and because then you have children, and if you're not emotionally healthy, then you're not going to be able to help your children become emotionally healthy, to become decent humans. And not that I wasn't a decent human, but just that I wanted more for my life. I don't want to be angry. I want to figure out why I'm angry and know that I'm angry because of me, not because of what somebody did to me. Now, of course, there's good anger. I get that. Like someone did something horrible. I'm not talking about abuse or, anything like that. I'm just talking about in general, in everyday interactions, even with my husband, like if he doesn't do something that I ask him to do, I get angry. How am I going to respond to that? Like, again, I go back to, I want to have an amazing marriage. So instead of responding out of my anger, I'm learning how to process that anger. And then I can go to him and be like, hey, I'm really hurt. And I got angry because you didn't do this. And it made me feel like you didn't love me. Because if you did, then you would have done it, but that's just in my mind. Maybe he just forgot, or maybe he was tired, or maybe he got lazy and he didn't do it. And then that offers an apology versus just coming right at him and saying like, you didn't do this and you never do what you say you're going to do. And, less of that and more of, coming with compassion and love, because I'm not trying to get what I need from someone. I'm getting what I need from myself, and for me, because I believe in God, from God.
Have you ever heard of have you heard of Brene Brown?
Yes.
She always talks, I love her. She always talks about this idea of like when she feels a certain way, she has some level of, let's say, like you said, frustration or anger, she's processing it. And then when she shares with her husband, for example, if she's frustrated or upset at her husband, she actually expresses her frustration in a way where it's like, I feel right. I mean, that's kind of the classic, like say how you feel, as opposed to like blaming, like you didn't do this. And so I love that she starts her conversation with her husband as the story that I'm telling myself is the story, right? Because it's not this like, I think a lot of times when we address conflict, it's like, you didn't do this and now I'm mad because, if you loved me, you should have done this. Like, whoa. Like that's just not how, right, it all played out. And so when she said that, I was like, oh, that's a really powerful tool. Like you said, of communication, because you're not coming in with like swords daggering, but it's like, there's a level of vulnerability that you're saying, hey, like you actually used earlier in your example, you said, I was hurt that you didn't do this. And then therefore I was upset because I interpreted that as,
Right.
you didn't love me because you didn't do this or something like that.
Right.
And it's like, oh, that's not true at all. Right. But a lot of times we skip that vulnerability communication and we say, did you not do this? Right. And then it just becomes two defensive sides, like, trying to battle each other. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that because I thought it was beautiful
Oh,
that you
thanks.
mentioned
Yeah,
that.
we're
Yeah.
complicated people,
Yeah,
So,
I love that. And what I want to highlight as well is, the fact that, again, like if we trace it back to your younger years as you were coming up, you had a lot of emotion, you had a lot of expression in yourself, although the environment you were in wasn't necessarily a healthy environment for expression, and the expression that was there wasn't necessarily the most positive, right? Where there's, emotional abuse and there's, drug use, things of that nature. We could see how that could create an environment where essentially your your outlet to express is stifled, right? And that personally, I find that to be, for me personally, it's one of the most painful things, right? I tell people if I ever am angry, right, it's either one thing. I'm not actually angry, I'm hungry, so just feed me. Or if I'm upset, what's actually going on is I'm in a place where I'm having a hard time expressing and communicating.
Yeah.
Right? So I feel like I'm not being understood, or I can't understand the other person, and that lack of communication is driving me crazy. So from there, like the person we see today, like I see like a clear connection actually to the superpower, and it's starting to make sense of like, oh wow, this is why April's able to hold a space that allows people to come in and really express themselves and really be authentic, right? Because you didn't necessarily get to do that, and you
Right.
weren't necessarily rewarded for that, because you reward people for that, which like I've noticed, like a part of your behavior and a part of how you show up. At least this is what I've been fortunate enough to feel from you, is you reward people for showing up authentically. And it sounds like even within your marriage, you make it a point to create a space that the level of communication, the level of authentic communication, can not just be awarded, but actually be developed and grown. And that is something that's definitely a tool that serves business extremely well. For business is people, and being able to express and communicate authentically with people is how you do good business. So I see how that correlates directly with today's superpower. Would you agree with that?
I do. Yes. I mean, I was thinking that um it's like I said before, I think that everything is related to something else. Back to what Elena was saying, even about Brene Brown. I heard one of her stories was she spilled her coffee in the kitchen when she was by herself. And the first thing she thought was, dang it, Steve. And, she actually said a curse word, but he wasn't even in there. And she went all the way back, like through this whole entire, like why she was mad at Steve because he got in late, and it's her husband, and she likes to go to bed early, but she can't sleep well until he's home, and she told him to come home at 10 and he came home at 12, and so she spilled her coffee because she was tired, right? And so it's just like everything relates back to something else. And I think I was just so unaware of all of that. And it's so freeing when you do become aware of it. And so I think I have a little bit of a radar for authenticity, which is why like I love Pace and you guys and Sub 2. I mean, so many people in Sub 2, because there's just so many people willing to come authentic. And it's just like you said, it's important because people sniff out BS, even in your business and real estate. I just try to talk. I don't get nervous to talk to sellers. I get excited. I don't get nervous because I'm like, I'm just talking to another human, and I'm just asking them their story. That's and maybe it'll work out, and maybe it won't. But I'm just talking to another human, like I'm talking to you guys. And I'm talking to another human that has a story that's also broken, and also, has whatever's going on with him. And I'm just trying to find that connection and trying to figure out how we can work together. Or, even with friendship, and marriage, it's like we all have a story and we're all bringing it to the table when we come together. And if we take full responsibility for ourselves, even though I do come from a background that's hard and sad, I still have to take responsibility for my future and for my children's future. And so I want to create space to go back and grieve the things that didn't happen
Mm,
for me as a child, and also um, take that and know that I'm creating a different space for my kids, who can then create a different space for their kids, all
yeah.
from, the work that, I've done and that I've been aware of, and it really comes from when you're down at the very, very, very bottom. Honestly, like
Yeah.
it's like that hitting rock bottom, or that aha moment where you realize, like, oh, I don't have this all together. So what is it that I need to change? And a lot of it comes from your story.
Yeah. Can you share speaking of stories, I actually am curious. And I feel like so that I have two questions and they're gonna be kind of like two stories, I think, just naturally, I think, by the way that I'm gonna kind of form them. So the first one is you talk a little bit about um, addiction and marital strife within your family, right? And kind of along the lines of even just the namesake of this podcast, redemption stories, drawing pain or drawing superpowers from pain or something like that. I forget exactly what it is. That's terrible that I'm forgetting.
Yeah, that's
But
good.
so um can you talk a little bit more about that pain? Um and then number two, you had said, and I loved the way that you phrased it, is like, sometimes we are kind of ministering to our former selves and that pain, right? So can you share kind of maybe just talk a little bit more about as early as you could remember, like, this is painful.
Yeah.
And wait, this doesn't really seem normal. And then kind of talk about like how younger April was perceiving and navigating life during that time.
Yeah.
And then also then like the second part of that question later on is how did you kind of heal from that? Because earlier you said, well, I didn't know how to really make sense of everything until later on when you purposely went back to I love how you use the word grieving too, right? And healing. Can you kind of share a little bit of those two stories?
Sure. So those are good questions. um, so I think what's hard about my story and why I've done a lot of work on it is because, when you don't have like necessarily, like, first of all, when you don't, when this is all you know, like I'm living in this my whole life and it's really all I know. And it actually wasn't drugs, it was food first and then alcohol. It went from food to alcohol, and the food thing was pretty intense. And it was a broken home, and my parents got divorced when I was 15. But it's kind of like you look around and so many people are going through that. Parents get divorced, addiction. So when it's not actually happening to you, like actual physical abuse or the opposite, sexual abuse, you kind of tell yourself, well, I know something's not right, but I'm not getting abused. So, you know, you have no idea. And even when after my parents got divorced and everything happened surrounding that, and I did a cross country move right before my senior year in high school, so I had to switch
Oh,
schools my senior year in high school. And I just, I was a fighter. So I just kept telling myself, like, you can make this work. Like, you can do this. Like, you're taken care of. You're fed. You have a bed to sleep in. Like, people have it way worse. You want to do this whole people have it way worse.
Mhm.
But the thing is that your pain belongs to you,
oof.
and I was never really taught that. And so I went on like that for a long time. And, I think that like my emotions were just very volatile and I believed them. And that's the thing. I believed them and I reacted out of them. And really I ran as far away from the pain as I possibly could. And I think that like once, you get married and you have kids, there's just kind of like this, like you can't run away from it necessarily anymore, because you can't run away from your person, or you can't run away from your kids. And so I knew that I was going to need to do some work. And as I started doing some work, and someone, my counselor was looking at me and being like, wow, like that is so painful and so hard. And I'm like, really? And even looking at it, like she would say, okay, if one of your friends' kids who's 16 years old, this was happening to them, what would you say to them? And that really kind of like changed everything for me when she asked me that question, because I thought, oh my gosh, I would be so devastated, and I would say, this is not okay, and I love you and you're worthy, and saying all those words, I was saying all those words to myself. And so I just was so unaware for so long, and I knew that something was not right about it. But when it's all you kind of just keep going back to it, and you find friends that are like that, or like someone in your life that is an abuser, or like I'm kind of a codependent person, because children that were raised in addictive homes, they become kind of codependent. I liked being the person that my mom relied on emotionally, right. Yeah, right. And I liked being the person. So then I found a friend like that. And, she had a very broken marriage. And so I like came in and I helped her, and I was the person, to help her. And then it just became a very unhealthy codependent relationship, which it's a really cool story with her too. We actually went to counseling together and overcame all that kind of stuff. And so like I said, I'm a big proponent of counseling, and
I love it.
I care for my friends, and I didn't want to lose her as a friend, and she was willing too. So but like you find, like you'll even get into a relationship like that. Like they say you marry your dad. Well, if you're not doing the work, then you might, and maybe marrying your dad is a good thing, but sometimes it's not a good thing, and you want to break out of those cycles. And, the only way that you can do it is by doing the work. And I tell you what, it is just like so freeing when, sure, will I have tendencies? Of course. But when you're more aware, you have healthier reactions,
Mm-hmm.
to the things that are going on around you.
That is so good. And I mean, what you just said, you just scared me a little bit. You just made me think for the first time, if I ever met a woman that was like my father, I would cry. I just like, oh my gosh. However, you're right. Right. If we don't actively do the work to break out of the cycles, we get caught in that cycle, right? We get pulled back into that vortex. And, what's really interesting is you mentioned how it wasn't until you were asked, if this were, your friend's 16-year-old child or your 16-year-old child, it wasn't until that moment that it actually started to become clear to you that, oh my gosh, like, what am I allowing for myself because I wouldn't allow for others? And how easy it is for us to excuse the challenges, the things that really don't belong in our life that aren't serving us. We excuse those things and we allow them to stay, right? We allow there to be terrible guests in our life, terrible guests in our homes. However, when we're looking for others, when we're looking over them, we would never let them do that. We would never allow that sort of behavior or those sort of tendencies to stick around. But we excuse it for ourselves. So I love that vantage point of actually taking your mind out and putting someone else in your situation and telling them what you would do, and then realizing, oh my gosh, I'm actually speaking to myself, right? Because I always give credit to I have a high performance coach, and I give credit to her because she said something to me. She said, Marlon, if you really want to truly become influential and truly create transformation, that will happen when you learn to take your own advice. And that was like such a gut punch. I was like, oh my gosh, like, why do you know me so well?
Yeah.
So I like that because at some point you started to realize I need to take my own advice.
Mm-hmm.
And you started to, like you said, do that inner work. So that's really interesting. And I just want to highlight for a second as well the fact that because someone's listening to this, right? And I'm sure they're relating right now because they're thinking to themselves, oh my gosh, April, like I've been in the same exact situation. I'm currently in that situation where this is all I've known, right? I don't actually know another way. And something has felt off, but I don't necessarily know a better way for there to be, right? What would you tell them, like if they're feeling that hint of like, hey, something feels sort of off, like how should they investigate that some more?
Well, I'm not a counselor, but I would say to, like Elena was saying, be curious. Be curious about, your emotions, like when you feel elevated in any type of way, like, sadness, like, why is this making me sad? Oh, because this happened. But, this might not make Elena sad. So why is this making me sad? And it's usually attached to something, or even like, why am I always, or why do I like to be early? Or how come I'm always late? Just even little things like that, like being early or being late, it usually comes from somewhere, and so just being curious about your emotions and your body, because I think like everybody feels stress somewhere different, right? Like if like my stress will usually like be in my shoulders, like my shoulders will be up to my ears, when I'm stressed out. Some people feel it in their stomach, they can't eat, and so when you feel these emotions, instead of just toughing through it, it's being curious about why you're feeling that way or where the emotions are triggered, because our bodies always remember, but our minds have like a very, they're protectors, but our bodies are in the present and our bodies remember. And so your body will sometimes react to a situation that it remembers that it was in, whereas your mind has already protected itself from the trauma or the pain. Or even like you made a promise to yourself, like, I don't know, your girlfriend or boyfriend broke up with you in high school. And that can be a trauma, your first love, right? We have all these little traumas throughout our lives, and we have big traumas throughout our lives, that can be pivotal points, but we don't want to discount the little traumas too, like a broken heart or a car crash. A car crash could be a big trauma or it could be a little one, and these are all things that it makes us alive to feel our emotions. Like we shouldn't have fear over like, wow, that is really sad that, you got, and if you got your heart broken, and if I can't be sad that I got my heart broken, then how am I going to help other people hold their sadness? And oh, I was going to say something else. I can't remember. You said, I can't remember. I'm sorry. But I just want to be aware of, all my traumas and allow myself to grieve all those little traumas and put them in their rightful place. Because if you don't, then it, like, your emotions will stay inside your body. But if you speak them out, it's actually scientific that they leave your body.
Yeah.
And so if you're able to say like, wow, this makes me really sad, it's not going to like stay like in there in your body. It's actually going to leave, and you're going to be able to start processing those things. So again, I'm not a counselor, but I listen to a lot of counseling podcasts, and I also have gotten a lot of counseling in my life, because it's just, the brain just like is so interesting to me, and just how like it can heal itself from anything, and it's kind of like, obesity is not an irreversible disease, right? And so even like all of our traumas, like your brain is constantly, it will heal itself and it will rewire neural pathways, and it's just crazy, but you got to do the work,
This is I think, I don't know if it's backwards, but the title of this book is How to Do the Work, and it's phenomenal.
Love
and
it.
just real quick, to connect what you're mentioning too, the one of the words in psychology that we use is psychosomatic pain. And I love basically that describes what you were talking about, which is your body is feeling something in the present and it's over something emotional and mental. But a lot of times, right, we're trying to push through it, and it's like you're not actually, then you're going to just repeat the cycle, and your body's going to continue to feel stress, because your body is, when your body is feeling pain, it's trying to indicate something. And if we don't stay curious towards what that is, then it's like your body is going to remind you constantly of like, flag, like this, this is akin to the trauma that you've experienced that you haven't dealt with, flag. And like literally, I mean, just even obesity, right? The book talks about how even obesity and certain things, a lot of times they're like, oh, that's just genetic. I'm like,
No.
is it or not necessarily? Because that the book actually talks about how with traumas, when we develop certain coping mechanisms, for example, like eating and overeating to deal with our emotions, that actually can, when you experience the trauma and then you develop a unhealthy or what we call maladaptive coping mechanism, it actually changes our genetics. So therefore, then we're passing down that same unhealthy coping mechanism. So a lot of times when you're like, wow, like how come my genealogy, it's like, if you kind of look at like, old pictures of relatives, and you're like, great grandparent was like kind of skinny. And then all of a sudden at some point, it's like, there was like some level of like overweightness that happened. Right. And then it kind of passed down to the next generation. And then you're just like, oh, like my family's kind of like big boned, for example. Right. But it's like, what if there was a trauma there? Right. So to me, breaking generational cycles, there's so many layers to it. You can do it, mentally, you can do it financially, you can do it on so many different levels, to the point where it's like you're literally changing the genes of your genealogy by what you're doing, right? It starts with us, is that we know what we know, we don't know what we don't know. So it's like, we're not necessarily blaming past generations for not necessarily knowing how to develop, but it's like we are responsible now.
Right.
And it's like, that's why these stories are incredibly important, because it's like, hey, I heard April's story, and now I know something that could help me lean towards a curiosity, lean towards doing the work. And I have a choice now. I could either try to do the work or press through, right? And it's like, but that, like, how does that, and like, kind of like what Marlon was saying earlier, how does that serve you? I always ask that. How does that serve you to do it that way?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah. And it's interesting again. So, I see now this, even deeper sense of the superpower, which is also this deep sense of awareness, right? And like that in and of itself is a superpower. Like a lot of people haven't yet developed that trait of being so aware. And that awareness actually, it came from you having had the exposure to so many different situations, right? To have the triggers, to have the emotions come up so often, that you actually were given multiple opportunities to be able to say, hey, this is coming up again. What is it trying to tell me? What is it that I can use this for? Because with that awareness now comes a sense of direction. Like you said, right? I love this, right? April, you didn't say, oh yeah, no, I found out I was always angry, so now I just figured out how never to be angry again. Right? That's not what you said. You're like, no, I still experience anger. However, you now see anger as different. There's a story there. It's like, oh, anger. Well, yeah, it's when I get a large amount of energy in a very short period of time. How do I redirect this energy to produce something? How do I use this energy, this feeling as a trigger to create another habit in my life? So now when this energy comes, maybe the trigger is it sparks a different kind of conversation. It sparks me to say this instead, and we create a new framework around this. I love that, because without that awareness, it would just, these emotions would be happening to you instead of for you.
Right. And then I would have to be looking externally on how I could fix it versus internally.
Right. Or blaming everything else that has happened. Like, damn it, Steve.
Yeah, exactly. My friend and I always say that to each other, because
that's a good one. That's a really good one.
If it's the Brene Brown video, damn it, Steve, you know.
Yeah. And he's like, I wasn't even in the room.
I totally
Yeah.
related to that. Like,
Yeah.
you know.
I no, and that type of mentality, even blaming, right, is something that's modeled. And it's always really interesting because now that we're doing like these, public postings and whatnot, and it's not just within sub 2 anymore, like I get a little nervous talking about my own family. So mom and dad, if you're ever watching this, I love you. But we did develop also kind of similar unhealthy, sort of coping mechanisms and patterns in my family, which was kind of the blaming. Like somehow we thought that blaming would get to the root of the problem and the source, and then we could tell that person, don't ever do that again. But that's actually not, number one, compassionate, and number two, it actually doesn't really solve the problem, because we're just trying to kind of point fingers at maybe the possible, I don't want to call it origins of the fault, but it's like, well, like maybe we can kind of take a step back and not do that. But I think something else that I wanted to highlight too, in regards to your superpower, is that you said earlier that acknowledging the pain allows you to have empathy. I think that you kind of said something like that earlier. And I just wanted to highlight that, because a lot of the times it's like, if you have an opportunity to be compassionate towards yourself and your story and your younger self. My therapist always would tell me, what would you say to your younger self? And that's kind of weird. So that's why, April, your therapist said, well, what would you say to a 16-year-old that was experiencing similar things, right? And like my therapist kind of posed it as, what would I say to my former younger self? Right.
Well,
And
she
it's
did
like,
ask me that, and I couldn't
oh,
connect.
right. That's right. Right.
I was like, but I was me.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. But then you were like, wait a minute. So actually, because it's like a reframing of a similar question, right? It's an opportunity for you to be like, well, that was like, let me dig with April. And she's like, no, that doesn't work for me. Right. So it's like the beauty of therapists and good therapists is they reframe a question. So it's like, I love that she gave you an opportunity first and foremost to be empathetic towards yourself. And I think that's really, really, really incredibly important, because that's where that's where the beauty of and the root and the foundation of empathy comes from, is like being empathetic with our own story first.
Yep.
Right. And then you're like, oh, whoa, like I feel a sense of peace and healing that I am able to give myself empathy. Right. It's not staying in the victim mentality. I just really, really, for the audience members, like I really, really want to make sure that you understand that it's not an emphasis of, oh, let's be let's have the victim mentality. And it's like, oh, I'm just going to whine my way through all the pain. But I think it's just acknowledging it first.
Well, and I think victim mentality is more of the blaming. Because, to me, I see, a victim mentality, like, because you can be a victim, but not, succumb to victim mentality, where, oh, this person did this to me and I'm going to live under this forever. Right. Whereas if you can go back and just give yourself permission to say that this was hard and this was painful, because going back to, like, if you got your heart broken for the first time, if your parents said to you, like, oh, she's not worth your time, and don't be sad, just move on, you'll find there's plenty of fish in the sea, and then you just aren't allowed to be sad in the moment and grieve like something that was sweet and good in your life that came to an end. I mean, we can grieve over those things, even as little as they may be. So if I can't do that for me, then how am I going to do that for my kids? And I think that's where, breaking the generational curses comes. And that's just like a small one. But if you can repeat that several times throughout your life, like even me, so I moved my senior year in high school, and I had been, in one town at one school pretty much my whole life. And then I moved right before my senior year. So probably up until about 3 years ago, I had dreams multiple times a month that I never graduated high school, and that I had already finished college, but I had to go back and graduate. and I would always be going back to that high school. And I think part of it was because I just made myself think like, well, this is just the way it is. I just move on.
Oh,
And so
wow.
when I finally went back and kind of acknowledged all of that, then I stopped having the dreams.
Wow.
And so it was just like I was actually like dreaming some hard emotions that I wouldn't allow myself to face in real life. And I feel like that happens to me a lot. Um, where I'll have a dream and then I'll realize like, oh, these are emotions that are held in my body
Oh,
that
yeah.
I haven't acknowledged, but they're coming out in my dreams.
April, what's really interesting. I'm like trying to
He
hold.
can't contain himself. He can't contain
Yeah,
himself.
I can't because what's really interesting is earlier we kind of acknowledged that growing up you weren't necessarily able to express yourself, and yet there was things in there that wanted to just be expressed, right? Just wanted to be acknowledged. Like, look at me, see me, like hear me. I'm a person. I'm a full person, or I'm a full thing. Just acknowledge me. And you have these emotions that are inside there that are just simply saying, April, acknowledge me. Just acknowledge me. And as you were saying that, I couldn't help but relate because I'm sure you guys see my motorcycle helmet back there.
Yeah.
I was having, when I first got my motorcycle, a lot of people don't know this, for the first 2 weeks of me riding my motorcycle, which I absolutely love, I was having night terrors every single night. I was waking up in like a cold sweat every single night, just lurching out of bed 2-3 o'clock in the morning, fully just drenched, breathing heavily, and I was having these dreams of me just going off the road, slamming into a car, hitting the guardrail, just every single time. And I started to ask myself, does this mean I'm afraid of my motorcycle? Should I not be riding my motorcycle? And the next day I would get out and go on my bike and everything was fine. However, when I would go to sleep, the same sort of dreams were reoccurring. They kept happening. And it wasn't until one morning I went out to my bike and I just sat there with the bike and I simply just acknowledged, and my body is telling me that what we're doing is there's an inherent dangerous risk here and that we could potentially get hurt. And I may potentially lose my life on this. And once I acknowledged it, I brought my awareness there and I just simply said, okay, the dream stopped. Totally gone. Totally gone. And so as you're describing your dream, it's like there's something inside of you screams. It's like, hey, it's like, I just want to tell you. I just want to, teacher, are you listening? I really just want to tell you my answer. Like, even if it's not the right answer, I just want to share my story. And then once you let it share its story, it's cool. Like it got to express. And now it can
Well, it's released from your body then.
It's released.
So you can, at least you're aware. It's released from your body and now you're aware. Like, will those fears come up again? Yes, and then you'll acknowledge them. Like, yes, I acknowledge these fears, It's good.
Right. And then
what would you Oh, sorry.
No, you got it, Elena.
What would you say to someone who is scared to acknowledge and scared to verbalize their pain and their fears?
Well, because it is scary, and it's kind of like even starting out in this business, like it's scary, taking steps forward, even talking to sellers and all of that. I think that it is scary. And I would say that to them, like, hey, what are you most afraid of? Like, what I think, even in our marriages, I think it's important to, or friendships, like really close friends or even business partners, it's important to understand like your deep-seated number one greatest fear. I would ask them that, like, what is your greatest fear? And that might take a little bit of time to come up with, but like, for instance, one of my greatest fears is being left alone where nobody knows me and nobody loves me. And so I can even think back where I in high school and in college, I would constantly try to surround myself with people, and I always wanted to be doing all the things, and I would have really bad FOMO, and When I would have an argument with somebody, I would get offended because I would say, well, they don't know me like I thought that they did, and so it just, it helps to understand like what your greatest fear is, and to be curious about that, so that then you can acknowledge it. Again, it just all goes back to acknowledgement. And obviously, if you need help going through it, I mean, I also have had, mindset coaches that have done the same thing for me, like given me permission to, balancing motherhood and the work life is hard because I feel so guilty, and,
Oh,
I had a mindset coach one time that was just like, hey, like, what if you can be like a badass real estate person and also an amazing mom, and what if like you did just completely shut your phone off at, 4 p.m. until, 7 p.m. just so that you can strictly focus on your kid? That doesn't make you a bad business person. And so it's like he
oh,
gave me permission, because I think I was just so afraid of, like, if I'm not constantly working on my business, it's going to fail. And if I'm not with my kids 24 hours a day, I'm a failure as a mother. Like, I wanted to be 100% in both, but it's like, I can't necessarily be 100% in both, but I can be really good at both and have both in my life, as long as I'm just kind of letting myself off the hook, and allowing and giving myself permission to do the things that I feel like I need to do for my family, and also do the things that I need to do for my business.
I feel that to the core. Thank you for saying that. As a mom with young kiddos as well, like, and then just to be able to look up to like you and what you're doing and at your level, I'm like, oh, it's possible.
It is.
Like it's so important to have role models like you, April. Like I can't tell you how much that like healing that is. Like, oh my gosh, like mom guilt is real too. It's like it weighs us down. And so thank you for sharing that. That's amazing.
It is. It's tough. But I also know that I have an amazing relationship with my kids, and it does help just to constantly give yourself permission. Like you said, Marlon, take your own advice. Like, what would you say to, Elena, if she was coming to you with mom guilt? And, so that's why it's definitely important to have, mentors, coaches, counselors. I mean, I have it I go to a gym and I have a coach at a gym.
Yep.
I can't go to the gym and I need someone to tell me what to do and how to do it. I have, nutrition coaches. I have, and, so it's all about being held accountable, and also, surrounding yourself with people who are going to elevate you. Yep. And help you get to where you want to go in every aspect, whether it's spiritual, physical, and, in the business world.
I absolutely love that. And like what I heard for myself, and I want to highlight this, is set the standard, right? You can raise the standard, but you can also ditch that heavy expectation on yourself, right? Like you can raise your standard of what you want to accomplish, but then also like know that it's okay to you're in the right place at the right time as the right person, and you surround yourself with the right people even better. So I absolutely love that. And I agree with you. It's something that I don't think was preached heavily. I know when I was coming up, I didn't often hear the advice of, go and seek help outside of yourself. I think we really came from a culture that very much said, do it all on your own, right? If you want it done right, do it yourself. So that was the mentality we brought into everything. And the truth is we have blind spots. And the nature of a blind spot is most times I don't even know it's there. So I can't even build the awareness of my blind spot. I don't even know it exists, let alone when I find out it exists, I still can't even see there because it's still my blind spot. And that's where having that outside neutral party that has been through what you've been through, has worked through what you've worked through, they can call out plays from the skybox, right? Mm-hmm. They can see things, they see the field totally different than how you do. So having coaches for the areas in your life that We want to improve our relationships, our physical health, our businesses, our mindsets, our spiritual health, everything. I love that you're saying that, because again, like, maybe nowadays it feels very normal to us, just based off of the circles we're in and the rooms we go to and the people we're fortunate enough to have in our lives. However, at one point, it wasn't the normal conversation. At one point, this was new information. So I'm so grateful that we get the opportunity to repeat it and to keep it, to keep those ripples going in the pond.
Mm-hmm. It's good.
So
I have another question. Sorry, can I ask?
you got it.
So, you said something earlier that I thought was really interesting about how pain from your past, and I'm kind of painting the picture of how you described it, but pain from your past allowed you to have the superpower of empathy and also this ability to be like, I can do it, like really determined. But my other question is, you said earlier too that you you kind of developed a little bit of codependency as well, like always being the person that was always there. I didn't mute you guys, right? I just wanted to make sure.
No, my dog
Okay.
is barking, and so
Okay, no. I just both. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that I didn't do that. How do you work on your codependency tendencies, or have you already kind of worked past them?
Oh no, I mean, I think I'm always going to have those tendencies, So it's funny because I actually had a something that happened recently with my nanny, and she came into my life when Grace, my third, was very little, and it was at its, my business was kind of taking off, and I was super busy, and I just really needed someone to help me. And unfortunately, she was with us for a year, and then she left because we kind of got into a thing at the end, and it was kind of sad, and I really grieved that relationship. But when I looked back, I was like, oh wow, we had kind of created this sort of codependent relationship where she started doing everything in my house, and she would say certain things to me, like she didn't really need the money, and she wanted me to value her. And so I was trying to be there for her and to value her in what she needed, because I really wanted what she was serving up to me, which was kind of like a mom being in the house. She was a little older than me, and she took care of my kids. And, she said, do you hear my dog?
It's okay.
Okay.
I
All
like
right.
we're dog people.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. He's just sitting outside the door trying to get in.
He wants to be acknowledged.
He wants to be.
Yeah.
Hold on one second.
Side note, I used to work in vet.
Tell him to go away.
Oh.
Where was I? Somebody say my last thing.
So you were the nanny.
Your nanny.
Oh, that's right. And so, I looked back and I thought, okay, now I'm aware of what happened with this relationship, and some of the things that she had said to me and that I had said to her. I was like, oh, okay, this was kind of becoming a very unhealthy relationship, which is why in the end we kind of had like a little thing where I was like, yeah, I don't think I want to do this with you and do this dance with you anymore. And, at that point I had to decide, like, okay, well, do I want to continue in a relationship with her? And my needs and my wants for my life that I'm missing, like I don't really have that mother figure in my life and I want one. And she kind of was there for me, said like, yes, I want to be in relationship with her and she can kind of be like a grandma to my kids. But yet it was unhealthy. So I literally had to call one of my, like, I call her my spiritual mother, and say, okay, here's the deal. Like, what do I do with this relationship? And she just had to point it out to me. Like, it's okay. Like, it's all you've ever known. But, you don't have to keep throwing yourself into these types of situations anymore. Like, you can take control of it and you don't have to walk into this anymore. And it's almost like I was set free from that in that moment. And then I was also allowed to be really, really, really sad about a couple different things, about a fact that like I don't have a mother figure or a maternal grandmother figure for my kids. And also sad that, I lost a relationship with someone that I had, once loved. Um, and so, these things happen, but luckily, I think the time frame was shortened. I didn't spend like a 10-year unhealthy relationship with this person. It
Right.
actually was shortened a little bit. And, I was able to be like, okay, like I can stick up for myself in these situations in a healthy way where I wasn't sticking up for myself because I was too afraid of losing something that I felt like I needed in my life.
That's so good.
And I need it? No. Do I want it? Yes. It's a good, beautiful thing. But also I don't need it, like I have everything that I need and my kids have everything they need and they're so well loved and they might not even notice, it's just, I notice because I feel like it's a loss in my life. And so then I'm going to project that onto my kids, like, oh, you need someone to love you,
Mm.
and really it's me, like I want someone to love me, and
Mm.
so I think that it is kind of like you're not going to completely escape, you know, your stuff. You don't have to be afraid of it. And you might, make new and different mistakes. And, it's like I don't mind making mistakes in my business because I know I'm never going to do that again. And you might be like, "Oh, I can't believe I did that." I spent $3,000 on a probate attorney and I didn't run title. And there's a $50,000 judgment on there. Now I just lost $3,000,
Oh no.
and it's like you can really get onto yourself for that, or you can be like, well, never doing that again,
Yeah.
and now when anybody comes to me and says, what should I do when I'm doing this? I'm like, well, first thing you want to do is run title. So it's like there's a million things that I don't know, and I'm not going to know. It's like you don't know what you don't know until you
Yeah.
do it. And it's, if it's a mistake, then it's great because you learn from it, and you don't want to just like let yourself get bogged down in any of it. Don't let yourself get bogged down in it. Acknowledge it and then move on, and when it comes back up again, acknowledge it again and then move on.
I love that. And it falls in line with, you're able to gain this perspective, right, by having outside influence, right? Being able to pick up the phone and call, like your spiritual mother, if you will. And she's able to tell you. And again, like it's also you taking that ownership, you actually putting yourself out there in a situation to even have the opportunity to learn. That's absolutely critical. Elena, how are we on time?
About it's like 3:20. We got about like 10-ish minutes.
Perfect. I want to make sure we're respectful of April's time. So essentially with that, right, you now have the power, right? You've developed a superpower. How are you seeing it go to practice in your day to day? Right? Like so now that because you're someone that's actually again, like so our guests are typically two sorts of individuals. Right? Some individuals are totally like lost in the muck, like, oh my gosh, I got no idea. Like this pain doesn't even turn into a superpower. You guys are crazy. Like this is just pain. This is not going to ever serve any good. And then some of our guests are on the opposite side where it's actually been forged out and it's been put to use. So can you explain now how essentially your ability of having this awareness has started to serve your life at a higher level? Because again, like you've come a pretty far way, especially since you and I spoke last year when you were on the show. You have developed so much more since then.
Yeah. I think about, what my superpower is a lot, and I don't even know if I 100% could even pinpoint it, or if I even know that it comes from my pain. I think I just kind of try to be as and this is like such a buzzword, but just like as vulnerable or authentic, if you want to call it authentic, but just as vulnerable as possible. Because anytime you approach somebody with vulnerability, like they're going to react completely different, and so I think that through pain is where you learn vulnerability, and it can go two ways, right? You can either like toughen up and I'm going to move on and I'm not going to acknowledge this. But to acknowledge your pain, I mean, you got to be vulnerable, and you have to come out from underneath that shame, because I think like the point of shame is to like keep you back, and I like to think of it as like a blanket. Like we almost just want to put the blanket over and not like, I don't see my pain, I'm just going to put my blanket over, right? Because ultimately what shame says is there's something wrong with me, and I'm too scared to look at that, right? But really there's not, it's just you're human and you have feelings and you have emotions, and it's important, and it's important to acknowledge those things. And I don't know, it's just continually learning and continually changing and trying new things and setting goals and learning and growing. I think knowledge is like huge. I mean, I'm like the biggest podcast listener ever. I listen to like a million podcasts, and, also giving myself permission to relax and be me. And, I like many different facets of my life. I have, my church community, that I have all my friends in my church community, and they elevate me and they help me, in my spiritual life. And then I have my gym that I've literally been going to my gym for 12 years. And I have tons of friends there, and they help me be better, at the gym, like don't just go twice a week, like go 5 days a week. And, they keep me accountable. And then I have, my business and my mentorship and my friends and my mentorship that keep me accountable. And I think a lot of it is just surrounding yourself with the right people that can also be vulnerable. Like you guys, you guys are sitting here and you have to come vulnerable first to make it comfortable for somebody else. And not everybody's going to understand it right away. I honestly do think, though, that in order to be extremely successful and to make it, at some point you're going to have to look at yourself. I saw a really good video this morning from Ed Milet, and he said, I'm not actually having a good day today. I don't know if you guys saw it, but he's like, I don't feel like it's my A game today. And he goes, and I think, a part of it is that I had a really big week last week. And he said, so you want to max out every day, but that's going to look different every single day. Like your max on some days, maybe more than other days, right? So every day, do the very best that you can for that day. And sometimes that's going to be like, I don't know, going to get your nails done, or watching a really good show on Netflix and just kind of unwinding and letting yourself, like, I like Netflix, I'm not going to drown in Netflix for hours and hours and hours, but like, sometimes I like to, come out from making calls and make myself a salad and sit in front of the TV for 30 minutes just to be like, think about nothing, and let my brain like just go somewhere else, and listen to somebody else's story on TV. I love like really good like mysteries, because I like to get wrapped up in other people's stories. And I'm like a whodunit addict, because I'm so interested in just like how things end up where they end up, like, wow, like this could be me if I'm not aware. I mean, seriously, like even a love triangle. Like, how does a wife go to murder her husband instead of getting divorced? I mean, that could be you if you're not paying attention to what's going on inside of you. like you could go that direction,
Yeah.
and we think, oh, I would never do that. Oh no, like
Yeah.
you could if
Yeah.
you're not paying attention.
I love that, right? And I like that. Again, you just gave people permission. I think we should like highlight that for a second. Like, it's okay to recognize that some days, like your best effort is just showing up, right? Putting on your pants, showing up one more day, recommitting to your journey, and resting, right? Turning your mind off, turning your brain off. I'm in the same boat with you, April. Like, I love a good Netflix every now and then. Like, I think I told Elena one week, I was like, Elena, I'm gonna go get a burrito and go watch some anime right now.
Perfect.
That's where I'm at, and that's what I need today. But to your point, it only comes when you have the awareness. Because
Yeah.
I can't say that every day of the week, because then the truth is, it's like, well, no, Marlon, you're well rested. Now you're just being lazy, right? There's a difference between resting and being lazy.
Right.
So, but again, that comes. I love
Well,
it.
and there's dignity in resting, and there's just not a lot of dignity in being lazy, right? So you want to like put dignity where it belongs. And the same thing too with acknowledging your pain. Like you're giving, dignity is like God given, I believe. Like we all have that, and there's people that are going to try to steal it from you. And so it's like if you want to go back and you want to put dignity to the situation, right? Like giving back dignity. And it's the same thing, like there's dignity in resting. Whereas being, and being lazy is kind of a hard one. But if you're watching Netflix and eating bonbons day after day after day after day, there's something seriously wrong. If you can't get out of bed for 2 or 3 days, there's something seriously wrong. Like those are big indicators, right? So you just want to be aware of your indicators, like you're not, if you take a day to yourself or 2 days for yourself, like that's what you need, and you need to rest. And so that, like I said, there's dignity in rest, and there's dignity in acknowledging your pain. And it's important to remember that.
I absolutely agree. Oh my gosh, it's so deep. And yeah, no, I think that's something, again, we don't really have that conversation. Oftentimes people feel shame about resting and not recognizing that resting is actually a part of performing. Resting is a part of getting to that next level. Being on that higher level is giving yourself that room, that space to recuperate. Right? It's not all go all the time. Right. And it's really interesting. I'm training for a marathon right now. And yesterday, while I was running, it was yesterday, I did a 12K. So I think it's like 7.8 miles. I don't run often. Right. So I was like, oh, shoot, am I going to be able to do this? And as I was running, I'm running with the Nike Club app. Shout out to Nike for making a really cool app. And what was going on is it's a guided run. So the trainer is actually telling you, hey, you're going to push it to 50% effort. Right? He's using a keyword. He's saying effort. And now I need you to raise it up to 55% effort.
Right.
And as to a certain point in the run, he says, look, I'm going to have you take it from 55% effort to 60% effort. But notice I'm telling you to raise the effort and not necessarily raise the speed.
Right.
Because now as you're starting to get a little bit more tired, it's going to take a little bit more effort to maintain and be aware of this. Right? He says this is the part of the run where you're not necessarily running any faster. Right? So this is the part of your journey where you're not going any faster, but I need you to be a little bit more intentional. I need you to be a little bit more aware. Don't let your mind drift off quite yet. Right? This is the part where it's annoying to focus. However, because you can do this, you're going to start to unlock something a little bit new. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. I never looked at, running as this sort of marathon. And we look at life, we look at entrepreneurship, we look at personal development at this sort of marathon. When we look at it through this lens, right, we start to see, okay, like, hey, the pain you're going through, hey, let's add a little bit more effort. Let's add a little bit more intention. Let's look at it with a little bit more of a magnifying glass and maybe magnify a little bit more. This isn't necessarily the time to change it. Just let's be aware of it first. And then we can do something more with it, that level of awareness. So, like, April, like, I love that because you keep saying awareness, and like in my mind, it's like it's just running on repeat. So I really appreciate that.
My therapist would say, just notice.
Yes.
Just notice.
Yeah.
Oh.
Cool. Man, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can I ask one more question?
Yes.
So I was at the mastermind, the sub 2 mastermind where Pace calls you. And he makes that announcement, like, congratulations, you're part owner of the title company that they have. Like, what did that do to what did that do to you? Like, in your sense of like just that desire to like want to be acknowledged and like, yeah.
Well, I think I was just kind of in shock, like he didn't, preface and I'm like, I don't even know like what this looks like or what this means. I think I'm a person that like I have to like let it sink in, and so I know when I was younger, my mom used to always tell me like at birthday parties I was the worst at opening presents or gifts because my reaction was, I guess, not good enough. I don't know. That's just what I was told. So I'm like very aware of like what my reactions are and also like how I feel in these moments of like getting gifts and getting something good, how I almost have to like talk myself into like, yeah, you deserve this, like, or you don't deserve it, but you get it, and you just get it, like, and that's the way it is,
Yeah.
Because I don't always think we deserve things, but that we do, because life is a gift. And I look at life as a gift, and that, even like all the pain, all the hardship, all those things, like it's a gift to be alive with all of those things. And so I think that it is like, I don't know, it took me a while to process it. I think I'm still processing it. I get, updates and text messages. So it should probably be ready to go by the beginning of 2023. So we're still in the process of, getting everything together. And, I always just ask a million questions like, why me? Like, what am I bringing to the table? Like, what do you, because I want to, I want the gift, but then I also want to feel like I'm doing my part, so I think that it's still processing for me. I don't know if I fully have grasped it yet, but it's amazing. And I feel so lucky. And, it's like Pace has always been such a big supporter. And, it has been a lot of his like telling me, that I can do this, that I feel like is helping me be so successful. Like his voice in my head, saying like, wow, you're so good at this. Like you can do this. You're such a, you're an action taker. You're this. And he made me aware of the things that I was doing. And then I was like, oh, I am doing these things. Like, oh, people don't do these things. And this is why they're not successful, but I do them. And that is why I'm successful, because sometimes I'm like, it's just luck, that's what I tell myself. But then it's like, no, it's not, and I heard, it might've been Robert Kiyosaki or one of those guys that said, the more successful I get, the luckier I get. And so when you are putting in the work and putting it out there, we think of it as it's luck. And that resonated with me because I'm like, oh, it's just luck. But no, he's like, really, the harder I've worked and the more successful I am, the luckier I am. And I thought, gosh, that's so interesting because it's just so true. If I'm not putting offers out or putting anything out there, then I'm not going to get anything. And so it's like, the more I work on it and the more I put out there, the more that comes back to me. And, I feel like that's just like the way the world works in America. I can't speak, for other nations or countries, but in America, luckily, we are live in a place where like you can work and you know you can put stuff out there and you can get it back. And it's the same thing, you know, with your friendships and with your marriage and with your children. Like you put in the work, like you're gonna reap the rewards.
Yeah.
So
Well, congratulations, and
thank you.
you are enough and you are deserving.
Thank you.
And I like bawled my eyes out when he made that call. I didn't even know you. I knew of your name, of course, because you're one of the OGs in the Sub 2 mentorship, but I like I cried the entire mastermind, to be honest, but that was like
Yeah, I know.
one of the first, that was one definitely like when he called you and he made that announcement, it was just like so powerful.
Was
and
my
so
reaction
beautiful.
okay, Elena? Because I looked back like, what did I say? Was I thankful enough?
No, you were, of course, you were,
Thankful
yeah.
enough.
And I'm sure that you were probably like in shock too, because it was just
Yeah.
like a Saturday morning or a Friday morning, and it was like, and you were like, "Hey, how's it going? What's
Yeah.
you know?" Of course, like when you get a call from Pace, it's like,
Well, yeah, like
yeah,
pace, you know,
right.
Yeah.
What did I do
Yeah.
wrong? Or like that's what
Yeah,
I mean.
I'm
That's the
still processing it. I am just super excited. I can't wait for it to start, and I can't believe that it's all happening, but it's all happening, and it's just the beginning.
Yes,
It's just the beginning for all of us, you know,
yes.
like where we were a couple years ago to now, you know, it's just like it's just starting, and it's this good. Like I can't even imagine, you know, what's coming for us.
Yeah.
I absolutely love it. Well, April, I want to say thank you so much for coming on today. Thank you so much for being vulnerable, being able to open up, to share, and allow us to go through your past so that others can learn from it, to show how it's turned into a superpower and show that you're utilizing the things that happened for you in your history that now allow you to grow. April, if people are interested in connecting with you and they want to like plug in, what's the best way for them to do that? How should they connect?
Yes. So if you go on my Instagram, I have a link tree in my Instagram. You can go to my website. I also, if you want to book a phone call, I do 15-minute phone calls. You know, I have a couple hours every week that I offer that up to people. And my Instagram handle is my name. It's April N Juliano. So APRILNJULIANO. So I post a lot of things up there, and you know, if you ever wanted to chat, you can, you know, book some time with me through my link tree on Instagram.
Is that right? April N as in Nancy Giuliano?
Yep.
Not that your middle name is Nancy, but just
Yep.
April. Okay.
Nicole.
April Nicole Julia.
Yep.
That's amazing. And thank you. I mean, gosh, so many different levels. Like thank you for leaning into your pain and coming through the fire, on the other end, being the incredible badass mom, woman, entrepreneur, like everything, and leader. Really, I think that, like you said, connecting more with people, exploring more with people, and really you are an incredible leader to not only look up to and to learn from, but I think just even your story in and of itself, the story of just, again, acknowledgement of pain, and just the triumph that you can get from that, is a beautiful testament and testimony of the work that God has done in you and through you. And
Thank you.
yeah, I mean, as a sister in Christ and as a mother, like I just am, it's like, it's so cool because like I know that we kind of like introduced to each other like at the Clever Summit, and it's like, oh, congratulate, and just like,
I know.
I mean,
that was very overwhelming. There was a lot.
It was a lot. It was a lot. But thank you so much, for being that older role model, not older, but like role model, excuse me. It's like the older in the sense of older to experience of life, that I feel incredibly blessed, even more so to know you and to know that your story, has just made an impact. I mean, generationally, gosh, when we think about it too, like you are breaking generational, cycles and creating a healthier path. And that's really the best that we can do, right? For our children and our children's children, right? So
Yep.
thank you.
Thank you so much, you guys.
For the audience, I recommend highly reach out to April, connect with her, go on her Instagram. She's been posting out content pretty regularly, and the quality of the content, by the way, April has been getting way better. I've been loving the content. And I would take her up on that phone call, because I can tell you right now, if it's even like a hint in your mind that you should, do it. Absolutely do it, because I know April's schedule. She gets extremely busy. There's no guarantee that that window will be open forever. So don't hesitate on it. I want to warn people right now, because there we go.
There you go. Yay.
So again, April, thank you for coming on. If you guys enjoyed this episode, if you enjoyed this show, make sure you do the things that we always ask for. This is for free, right? So what we want to do is we want to help as many people as humanly possible. And the only way for us to do that is to get this out to the world, right? That happens when you help us with the algorithm. That comes from liking, comments, sharing, doing all that fun stuff. Make sure you tune in live each week. This happens every Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So be sure to share this with somebody if you had any value. And I want you to send this to somebody that you think it would benefit. Don't just put this as a random Facebook post, but actually take the time to think about, you know what, I think so-and-so would benefit from this, and send it directly to them. You had two amazing, powerful women on here who are mothers who understand entrepreneurship and motherhood at the same time. Like, that is powerful. So I'm looking forward to next week's episode. April, thank you again so much.
Thank you.
See you guys next week. Again, Friday at 2 p.m. Pacific time. We are going to be following up in part 2 with Ryan Peterson's story. So yeah, it'll be a part 2 of just really hearing, kind of summarizing his story, and then wanting to help him do a little bit more work in terms of helping him to kind of break out of these cycles that he was struggling with in terms of self-defeating thoughts and patterns and stuff like that. So Marlon, thank you for being here during your trip to Long Island.
Awesome. You know how to end live? Your guys, Elena's totally in charge. I'm not even in the studio.
I'm gonna click end broadcast. We're good?
We're good.
Bye, y'all.